Something feels off, but no one can quite name it. The days go by, bodies move, clocks keep ticking, yet inside, everything seems out of place. There's a delay between what you feel and what the world shows you, as if reality has lost its tone, as if the sync has broken, and you're watching your own life with a few seconds delay. Nothing has visibly failed, and yet everything feels wrong, misaligned, echoing. You try to connect, but there's no answer. The universe, once so vivid, now falls silent. The signs grow faint, the confirmations vanish, and even when you're present, something in the field doesn't respond. As if your observation no longer touches what once vibrated with you, as if looking at reality is like speaking to a shattered mirror. But what if that's exactly what it is? What if the mirror that held your reality cracked? Not because life took a wrong turn, but because your gaze is being filtered through old noise, unseen pain, silent programs, and everything you observed returns distorted. When observation breaks, the world falls out of order, not as punishment, but as vibrational coherence. Reality can only reflect what you hold in presence, and if there is noise, there is delay, there is disconnection, there is dissonance. Maybe then what feels out of sync is just the reflection of a frequency that no longer belongs to you. And the world, Han, instead of failing you, is simply waiting for your gaze to touch it truthfully again. There's a silent phenomenon occurring, not in the events themselves, but in the background that sustains them. Like an orchestra tuned to another frequency, reality seems to play a melody your heart no longer recognizes. You feel present, yet everything echoes with delay, with static, with an absence that can't be explained. The connection with what's real seems to falter at an invisible point, the field of observation. You look, but don't feel. You act, but reap nothing. You intend, but the universe doesn't respond. And this creates a very specific kind of fatigue, not just physical, a spiritual fatigue, from trying to hold the vibration while everything around you echoes a signal that no longer fits. It's like being in a dream that's lost its internal logic. Everything keeps happening, but your soul doesn't follow. Because the tuning was broken, it's not about bad luck or a lack of worthiness. What's broken is the link between your consciousness and how it touches the world. What the ancients called the vibrational bridge, that subtle frequency connecting the observer to the observed. When that bridge weakens, when you carry too much weight, too many beliefs, undigested expectations, your perception becomes distorted. And reality responds to the distortion, not to the intention. This is the effect of broken observation, a kind of invisible fragmentation where you're still present, but no longer vibrating as a whole. You see yourself doing everything right, affirmations, intentions, silence, prayer, but nothing moves, because there's a crack between what you feel and what you sustain. And that crack is made of internal repetitions, thought loops that haven't been seen with neutrality, emotional fragments that keep dictating what you see, even when they're no longer part of who you are. That's why so much seems out of sync. The world isn't rejecting you, it's reflecting you. But when the lens is fogged, the reflection becomes distorted. The quantum field responds to your subtlest frequency, not to what you say, but to what you actually sustain when everything goes quiet. And if what you sustain is doubt, resentment, expectation, exhaustion, then that's what the field amplifies, not as punishment, but out of coherence. Carl Jung once said, "What is not brought to consciousness comes back as fate." When observation is unconscious, reality becomes a compulsive mirror. It repeats the pattern not to hurt you, but to reveal where your presence is failing, where your vibration is misaligned. And so the cycle continues. You observe with noise. The world echoes the noise, and the sense of dissonance grows. But there is a silent point where everything can dissolve, an internal space where observation stops judging and starts simply seeing. When you stop observing with the need for control, with the demand for results, with the emotional weight of the past, something shifts. The bridge begins to rebuild, because the universe doesn't need you to ask. It only needs you to be fully present in the now. This is the beginning of vibrational healing, not as an external act, but as a subtle realignment between your consciousness and the field around you. When you observe yourself truthfully, without urgency, without pressure, without the need to change everything right away, the field responds, because finally someone is there, present, aligned, alive. Maybe that's why so much has stopped working, because you stopped observing with truth. You started seeing the world through the eyes of someone who already expects to fail, someone tired of trying, someone disconnected from their own presence. But the world doesn't shut its doors. It simply goes quiet until your vibration becomes coherent again with the reality you wish to manifest. In this state, it's not the world that returns to its axis, it's you. And as a reflection, everything repositions, without effort, without struggle, just through presence. Because when observation aligns, reality doesn't resist, it listens and responds. There's something few people realize. Reality does not organize itself around what you want, but around what you consistently observe with emotional intensity. And this is where the silent trap lies, because even while desiring change, you keep observing through the same fragmented lens, the same conditioned gaze, the same vibrational filter, the same narrative that imprisons you without your awareness. You observe the present with the weight of what you've already lived, and so the field doesn't capture your intention, it captures what you carry, what lies behind your gaze, not what sits on the surface of your thoughts. That's why so much feels stagnant, because your presence is being mediated by noise that hasn't been purified. Old images, emotional memories, phrases that echo as internal truths. And every time you try to move forward, something pulls you back, not from lack of effort, but because of an outdated frequency. Reality is a mirror, yes, but a quantum mirror, one that reflects not form, but vibration. It doesn't show you what you want to see. It shows what you vibrate when no one is watching. The fear you don't name, the expectation you still feed, the doubt you hide beneath spiritual practices, the anxiety you mask as faith. All of this creates interference in your observation, and that interference is what scrambles the field. Have you noticed how, on days when you feel light, everything flows? The right encounters, the signs, the synchronicities, and how, on days when you're in conflict, even without doing anything wrong, the world seems to close off. That's not a coincidence. It's resonance. It's the universe showing you there's no separation between you and what you experience. What's out of sync is not the world. It's the alignment between your vibration and the frequency of the reality you wish to sustain. But why is this happening now with such intensity? Why does this breakdown effect seem to be amplifying? Because we're at a point of collective vibrational mutation. The field is more sensitive, more responsive, faster. What once took months to manifest now happens in days, and what could once be ignored now screams. Old patterns are collapsing, not because the world is worse, but because collective consciousness is being called to observe differently. This call is not comfortable. It pulls the ground from beneath you, exposes the flaws in your perception, reveals the cycles you insist on repeating even when they no longer serve you. And in that discomfort, a choice arises. Keep observing through the broken lens or accept that your gaze needs to be rebuilt, layer by layer, until it touches reality again without resistance. That's where many feel the urge to give up, because rebuilding observation requires presence without expectation, silence without pressure, love without desire for outcome, and all of that confronts the part of you that learned to see the world with fear, urgency, and need. But it is precisely in that silent surrender that something begins to reorganize, not in the world and yet, but within. You begin to realize the problem was never what happens, but how you respond to what happens, how you interpret, project, repeat. And there, in the space between impulse and reaction, there is a pure field, a point of vibrational creation where everything can be reframed. That point isn't in the future, it's now. In the very moment you choose to observe without carrying the past. Pure observation is not passive, it is creative. It realigns frequency, reprograms the field, heals the noise, and when you sustain it, even for seconds, the universe feels it and responds, because it doesn't need you to fight or to prove anything. It only needs you to be vibrationally whole, for your presence to no longer be an echo of who you were, but a true reflection of who you're choosing to be now. This is the invisible practice that transforms, the practice of a clean gaze, of listening without noise, of the silence that observes without judgment. It's not easy, but it's liberating, because when the gaze aligns, life becomes a clear mirror, and what comes back finally makes sense. You may feel all of this too and still doubt, because the mind will seek proof. It will try to rationalize. It will say they're just coincidences, that the world is hard anyway, that everyone is going through this. And maybe they are. But the question that truly matters is, how are you observing what's happening? Because that's where reality either reorganizes or fragments. While the mind searches for explanations, the field searches for coherence. And this is what almost no one notices. Vibrational coherence does not come from mental understanding, but from inner presence. The field doesn't respond to what you say you believe. It responds to what you vibrate even when you're silent. It's in that silence that the truth appears. It's in that silence that the mirror reveals what is truly being sustained. When life seems stuck, it's not because you're being punished or forgotten. It's because the vibration you emit is no longer compatible with what you wish to manifest. And as long as you keep observing the world through the same old lenses, it will keep reflecting the same scenarios, disguised as something new. The faces change, the situations change, but the emotional pattern remains. That's why you may feel like you're always starting from scratch, like you're fighting for something that never arrives, like you're repeating journeys even after so much inner work, because a part of you is still observing with the eyes of the past, with the expectation of being fulfilled, with the pain of not having been seen before, with the feeling of a spiritual debt that never gets paid. And all of this vibrates. All of this shapes the field. When you begin to realize that your observation is the root of your creation, something shifts, not instantly, but irreversibly, because the power doesn't lie in changing the world. It lies in changing the way you touch the world with your gaze. If there is judgment, the field hardens. If there is fear, it closes. If there is control, it resists. But when there is presence, it listens and begins to respond. That response, however, won't come in the mind's timing. It will come in the soul's timing, which is circular, symbolic, non-linear. The soul's time is not in a hurry. It has vibrational precision. And for that reason, sometimes you will be led into silence, into pause, into retreat. Not because something went wrong, but because the field is asking you to observe again. Without noise, without projection, without the mask of haste that always hides the wound of waiting. It's in that pause that many give up, because the ego wants movement. It wants signs, it wants results. And the field, in return, offers emptiness. Because emptiness is the space where the new is formed, the interval between a collapsed old vibration and a new one that is still being born. But it will only be born if you can sustain clean observation. If you can look at the nothingness without falling into the anxiety of needing to fill it. This is where alchemy happens, in the space between an old gaze that no longer serves and a new gaze that is still learning to see without control, without needing to understand everything, without trying to force anything, just seeing, being, feeling. And in that state of pure presence, the field repositions itself, like a mirror that returns to reflecting clearly what once seemed blurred. But for that, vibrational courage is required. The courage not to react the way you always have. The courage not to draw conclusions from what pain tries to tell you. The courage not to repeat the same gaze that already knows the end of everything. Because if you keep observing through the same lenses, the outcome will always be the same, even if the scenery changes. You are not broken. What's broken is the conditioned reflection, the lens shaped by fear, urgency, memories that no longer resonate with who you are becoming. And if everything seems out of sync now, maybe it's because you're being called to observe with new eyes. Eyes that don't expect an immediate return, but sustain presence even in the emptiness. Because only those who sustain the silence and pass through the mirror. There comes a moment when there's nowhere else to run. No technique seems to work. No external answer brings relief. And in the center of that void, something whispers, observe, don't act, don't react, just observe. Because everything you try to change in a rush repeats itself. Everything you try to heal with effort hides. But what you're able to observe without fear begins to dissolve on its own. This is the point where life invites vibrational surrender, a state where it's no longer about seeking solutions, but about sustaining clarity, where what matters is not what happens outside, but how you remain whole inside. It's at this point that many feel they've lost control, and in truth, they have. But what is lost here is the illusion of control, the belief that reality moves through effort. When observation aligns, control becomes unnecessary. You start to realize there's a silent field orchestrating everything, a flow that doesn't respond to strategies, but to the frequency you hold when no one's watching. And here the paradox reveals itself. The more you let go, the more the field organizes itself. The less you try to understand, the more the answers appear. The more you observe in silence, the more reality begins to vibrate in sync with your presence. But this synchronicity doesn't happen to please the ego. It happens as a natural response to a clean field, a field that is no longer vibrating lack, urgency, or expectation. A field that has finally understood that to observe is different from to desire, that to see is different from to judge, that presence is different from control, and that difference changes everything. It's in this space that reality stops being a burden and becomes a mirror again. Not the mirror that corrects or punishes you, but the mirror that gently shows you what you are truly choosing to vibrate. Because every choice, even the silent ones, has an energetic consequence. And reality is simply the visible consequence of everything you sustain in secret. Most people want the world to change so they can then feel different. But the quantum flow works the opposite way. First, you change the way you feel, then how you observe, and only then. The world reorganizes. Because the field doesn't react to promises, it reacts to coherence. And vibrational coherence is when what you feel, think, and observe are in silence with each other, without contradiction, without noise, without trying to appear calm while internally screaming for answers. This level of inner truth is not reached through effort. It emerges when you stop running from yourself, when you choose to stay at the center of discomfort without trying to reshape it, when, in the face of delay, absence, or lack of response, you choose to remain present, not because you expect something in return, but because you know that everything outside begins where you are now. Perhaps the feeling of being out of sync is exactly that, a call to return to the point where everything begins, the way you observe. Because to observe is to co-create. It is to touch reality with your vibration. And if your vibration is misaligned, confused, or fragmented, that is what the universe will reflect, not to punish you, but to remind you that reality is not something that happens to you. It is something that happens from you, from every sensation you haven't named, from every resistance you still carry, from every memory that still dictates how you see the present. All of that is present in the field, even when it's unspoken, even when you think you've moved on. That's why the call is not to change quickly, but to observe deeply, because only conscious observation dissolves the program. Only present observation reintegrates the lost part. Only true observation heals the frequency that got stuck in time. When you observe differently, reality doesn't resist, it listens, and begins to rewrite itself, not with noise, but with coherence. And maybe that's what the universe has been waiting for from you. Not more requests, nor promises, nor haste, but a gaze clear enough for it to finally respond. There comes a moment when everything falls silent. Not from absence, but from saturation. Life seems to have said it all. The signs have already been sent. The mirrors have already reflected. The cycles have already repeated. And what remains is the bare space between an old pattern that has unraveled and a new perception that has not yet taken shape. This interval is unsettling because you still feel but no longer know what you're feeling. You still desire, but the desire no longer vibrates the same way. You're still seeking, but the search no longer finds direction. This is the threshold between the old way of observing, marked by effort, by expectation, by interpretation, and a new state of consciousness, where observing is simply being, without shaping, without resisting, without narrating, just sustaining presence. And at this point, time distorts. What was once slow speeds up. What was predictable dissolves. Because the new reality is not arriving. It's waiting for you to let go of the old gaze so it can finally reveal itself. That's where observation becomes alchemy. The external world doesn't change first. What changes is your vibration as you touch that world. When there is neutrality, the field responds with lightness. When there is truth, the field reconfigures with precision. But as long as there's hidden expectation, the field hesitates, because the vibration of lack cannot sustain the manifestation of abundance. The vibration of fear cannot uphold the reality of freedom. And the vibration of urgency prevents the flow of organic time from emerging. You may have read everything, practiced everything, understood with your mind everything that needed to change, but if your field still vibrates anxiety disguised as faith, reality remains stuck. Not because something is blocking you, but because you're still trying to control the field with the very vibration that obstructs it, and control is the opposite of conscious creation. To create is not to force. To create is to sustain presence without noise. This is the subtlest and most neglected endpoint in the whole process. Reality does not yield to your will. It yields to your frequency. And frequency can't be faked. It can't be forced. It can't be simulated. It emerges from the quietest point of your being, from that place where you're no longer trying to please the universe nor protect yourself from it. You simply are, whole, aligned, with no need to prove you're ready. It's in that space that subtle miracles happen, not the visible spectacles, but the internal realignments that make the world touch the soul again. An unexpected encounter, a relief without reason, a sign you didn't ask for, but that arrives with the precision of something that always knew where you were. These responses are not born of force. They come from the silent collapse of an identity that has finally grown tired of trying to control the invisible. When this happens, there's no euphoria. There is peace, a different kind of peace, because it's not the absence of pain nor constant fulfillment. It's simply the end of the struggle with what is. Reality remains imperfect, but your gaze no longer fights it, no longer demands, no longer resists, and that surrender changes everything, because when there is no more friction between you and the now, time reorganizes, the flow returns, the field opens, and what once seemed stuck begins to move. But it's not an external, visible, immediate movement. It's a vibrational redesign, a new architecture of reality beginning to form from your new way of observing. The connections return, synchronicity reappears, meaning resurfaces, not as a promise but as a natural consequence of your presence, because now you're touching the world with a new gaze, a gaze that no longer needs to control, nor understand, nor fix, a gaze that simply sees, and to see, when it's true, is enough. Because in that state, reality is no longer a test to be passed. It becomes an extension of your field, a prolongation of your vibration, and everything that's out of harmony moves away. Everything in resonance draws near, not by magic, by coherence. You become magnetic not because you asked, but because you are finally whole. It's here that the world begins to spin in your time again, no longer the time of fear, nor the time of urgency, but the time of consciousness, of being, of the presence that observes and thus transforms. Maybe the world is not out of sync, maybe it's you now, detaching from the old frequency that no longer holds your truth. What seems like noise may be nothing more than the death of a pattern of perception, the silent collapse of a gaze that can no longer contain who you are becoming. When observation shifts, reality loses its familiar forms. And in that gap, between what was and what is not yet, everything feels strange. But that strangeness is sacred. It marks the beginning of realignment, the rebuilding of presence, the reconfiguration of the mirror. If this has touched your field, write in the comments, "I see with new eyes." That way, I'll know you stayed until the end, and that your gaze has already begun to change.